thank you everyone who is with us today. In case you weren't sure what event you logged on to, this is the Ask Me Anything hosted by Deep Tech Showcase, part of a series. Today we are honored to have our guest speaker, Max Briggs, NASA SBIR Ignite Entrepreneurial Engagement Lead, who's here with us, as well as Yoav Sadan, who will be moderating the majority of the event. Director of Business Development at Eagle Point Funding, who are our sister company, our beloved sister company, and grants and contract specialists.
Hey everyone, definitely didn't deserve the long intro, but I'm happy to be here.
You'll prove it. So our vision as Deep Tech Showcase, in case this is your first event or if you haven't, learned a bit about us, we are a large and very active ecosystem that do events like today and many other types of events and activities, all with the goal in mind of helping bridge the innovation valley of death, or the pain points on the way to commercialization for new up-and-coming innovative technologies and founders. So whether that's on a government track for companies looking to engage better with the government, where we try to help, we try to push things forward, as well as hone things within our ecosystem, or whether that's on a commercial track or an investment track, we try to be the connector that ultimately push innovation forward to market. Our community consists of deep tech startups on the one end. We work with companies mainly, many who have either been federally funded or are going after federal funding. But we primarily look for companies who are dual use, looking for potential customers, whether that's in the government or in the private sector. And we try and help out in any way we can. Then we have our stakeholders, who are corporate and government stakeholders on one end, and our investors who are coming to our community to look for deal flow, to look for companies that they may not have seen through other avenues of sourcing. And ultimately, what we also try to achieve here is bringing all these different industry heads, whether that's the founders or the stakeholders and decision makers, to the same table, and trying to bridge that the education part, which is the primary goal for today's event, is to educate people and to create a platform where government and founders can connect and ask questions and ultimately, better the process of innovation within the various agencies or organizations that we work with. Our upcoming, as I said, this is part of a series, our upcoming Ask Me Anything session is next week with Eileen Chant, Outreach Manager for the Office of SBIR CTR programs at the Department of Energy. We host events that are very different than today. Today is very educational, and that's the focus. And we try to give this event as a platform for people to come and ask questions. But we also host large showcase events, which Max is also very familiar with. Our next one being aerospace and defense, where companies will come pitch their technologies to panels of investors, corporate tech scouts, and federal agency representatives. And that's going to happen on January 26th. And I'll post links to these in the chat later on, so that if people want to sign up for those, they can. And today's agenda, right? What's the main focus today? So we're starting off with the introductions and opening presentations, which is what we're doing right now. We'll move on immediately after this segment to a live discussion between Yoav Sadan and Max Briggs, where we'll go over some questions that we prepared in advance, some key topics that we think are very relevant to discuss today. And then we'll go on to the most important part, which is the open Q&A with the audience. If everyone looks down at the bar below on your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A button. Throughout the entire event, we're not going to stop in the middle since we have the Q&A at the end. Just put your questions in there, and we'll go through them afterwards. I'll read them, and Yoav and Max can go ahead and answer them. So feel free to just write who you're asking the question to and what your question is, and we'll do our best to go through them as long as it seems like it's a question that's going to be relevant for the entire conversation. Your turn, Yoav.
All right, I'll make it short because nobody came here to listen to me. Our job is to help companies get non-dilutive funding. There's a ton of it right now. If you're interested, talk to me. I'm on LinkedIn, or also yoav@eaglepointfunding.com. There's a lot of non-dilutive funding, SBIRs and BAAs. If you want to close the year on top, if you want to do non-dilutive funding, talk to us. But as you can see, there's a lot of agencies and there's a lot of pull. The SBIR program got reauthorized at the end of September. So yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, we win federal funding. We do that systematically over a period of time. We got a great track record, and I'm more than happy to go into it later. Just know that we're here. We can help you with that. We can help you get funded. Let's move forward. What to expect? Kickoff call with us pretty quickly. We start working on the first proposal rather quickly, and we want to submit once a month, but the pace changes. Next slide. And I think that's it. Yes, let's first, Max, thanks for doing the event. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward for a while. For the people here listening, the actual hundreds of people now, could you tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about what you're doing right now, and let's kind of hit it off from there.
Yep. So, so first, my name's Max Briggs. I am my primary responsibility right now is entrepreneurial engagement lead for the SBIR program. The entrepreneurial engagement programming for NASA's SBIR program has been in the past primarily focused on two different avenues. One was the iTech program, which is essentially meant to be a kind of easy front door for companies that are not traditional, don't think of themselves as government contracting companies. They're kind of maybe seeking a commercial market or seeking private capital, but they go, well, wait a minute, actually, I think I can fit a NASA need, but I don't know how to engage with NASA. NASA seems intimidating. The first going into SBIR can be intimidating. I want to talk to somebody and just see, am I barking up the wrong tree kind of thing? And so we have that program has been, it used to be an independent program in STMD. It got pulled into the SBIR program, and now it's managed very closely with the SBIR Ignite solicitation. And then, so that is one element. That's kind of a community building element, kind of a phase zero, kind of like, let's be as inviting as we can to non-traditional applicants. And then the goal is to be able to transition non-traditional applicants, whether through iTech or other avenues, into the SBIR Ignite solicitation. We don't want to just engage them and say, yeah, you have a good idea. We want them to have somewhere to go. And so the SBIR Ignite solicitation is an attempt at doing that. Before I get into the SBIR Ignite solicitation, I am going to go back in background just a little bit to kind of try to show how I got there. And so my initial, initially I was an engineer at NASA. I've got a PhD in mechanical engineering. I worked on Stirling engines for the beginning part of my career and nuclear power systems more broadly. So nuclear power systems for various space applications. And so at some point I stopped being a in the weeds engineer. I came over to kind of the business side, and I started managing portfolios of companies for the SBIR program, starting off with the Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate. And so I think that's an important thing to bring up because first of all, people don't remember that the first A in NASA stands for aeronautics, and we are indeed responsible for funding a lot of innovation in emerging aeronautics markets. And the other reason I bring it up is because it's an example. It's a pretty good analogy to what's going on right now in commercial space. Is NASA used to be NACA, and they used to kind of be involved in kind of direct innovation for space. Or I'm not space. I'm sorry, for aeronautics. The job was to make sure we didn't get our butts kicked in the air when we were fighting, and that we were kind of leading. What could maybe become this commercial aviation market. And so they were doing those things. But then eventually commercial aviation became real. And all of a sudden, the amount of money and effort that NASA or NACA was putting into things were dwarfed by these massive companies that were profiting from what was going on in aeronautics. And so NASA had to navigate, how do you then become a player, one of many players in this larger commercial landscape? And that is going on in aeronautics. So we focus on kind of horizon scanning. How are you going to manage drone traffic? Are you going to be able to do air taxis? How are you going to get zero emission or low emission aircraft? All that stuff is kind of stuff that's like outside of what you would expect a Boeing to be doing for their next, airliner. And so we're really trying to figure out, where do we fit? And there's an analogy there. And the analogy is that commercial aerospace or emerging space markets are now in that same kind of emerging space where and NASA for a long time has not been the primary player in space. So we need to acknowledge that, and we need to fit well into that ecosystem. And so so there was this question that was posed to me while I was managing the R&D portfolio as to how we could manage our entire SBIR portfolio, or at least a subsection of it, to be more responsive to people who are attacking emerging commercial markets. So NASA is not only going to be responsible for sending people to the moon, sending people to Mars, we are also going to be responsible for making sure that America has a leadership role in kind of the commercialization of space, LEO and things like that. And so the SBIR portfolio, as it was constructed, did not necessarily lend itself to commercialization focused companies. And so there were a lot of questions asked about what could we do to make a commercialization focused company that's not going to be dependent on NASA revenue thrive. And so the SBIR Ignite solicitation is an attempt to attract companies that are not going to be dependent on NASA for recurring revenue. They're going to be dependent on NASA to de-risk their technology to the point where they become an investable company. So an investor might say, I love their business plan, but their technical risk is way too high for me at this point. And so we're here to try to burn down that technical risk, get you to a point where an investor is then going to take you to product, because NASA does not make commercial products. We do not claim to or pretend to be experts at getting you to an MVP or to scale. And so we really think the private sector should be funding and encouraging that next step. And so Ignite really exists to do that.
Can you talk about that for a quick second? You talk about de-risking an investment. Essentially, it sounds like you're describing that NASA kind of takes on itself some higher level of risk with emerging markets. How does that de-risk it for the investor? Or essentially, how should a company look at it when you describe it like that?
Right. So one way for me to describe it from the NASA perspective is that we would like to be catalytic capital, essentially.
Okay.
So in a lot of diligence processes for investors, they although it's not always as clean as saying this is the business analysis and this is the technical analysis, a lot of times it's done essentially in some kind of way like that. And commercial investor or private sector investors are usually pretty good at assessing business risk. What's my opportunity here? What's the risk? What's the competitive atmosphere? All that stuff they're pretty comfortable with. They're not necessarily great at assessing technical risk and not just assessing it, but actually actively participating in burning it down, right? And so, so where can NASA come in? I think that NASA can come in and say, it can be perhaps as simple as kind of like, okay, we're advancing the TRL to the point where it's less risky. But I think it can be more than just saying, okay, you met your milestone. It can also be a validation of NASA's interest in your product. So it can be an initial step at burning down not just the technical risk, like, okay, they achieved TRL 6, but now you know that one of your anchor customers is going to be NASA and they have eyes on this and they are a potential customer. And so you're going to be de-risking, hopefully, not just the technical, but also an element of your kind of like, and I hate to say this, NASA is generally a less cost sensitive customer than some others, right? We are essentially, we are willing to pay more for high performance stuff, and especially early on when no alternative exists. And so that presents some opportunities for companies, before they've achieved scale to actually have a product that's viable. And so, I view burning down risk as being essentially getting a company that is on its face right now, perhaps uninvestable or only investable at a certain level, and getting to them to the point where the private sector is really ready to go and take the next step.
So how do you see, like, obviously there's a lot of places there's a lot of pitfalls in the commercialization track. How do you envision a path with a company that applies to NASA Ignite or goes to ITech? How do you see their path and track?
Yeah, so I mean, if you want to kind of like the home run for what the entrepreneurial engagements like kind of value add to a company would be, let's say if there's a company that views their future as being a private, we're going to provide some service to the LEO economy. Let's say it's returning samples from some commercial LEO destination. That's what they want to do. But right now, all they've got is a really good idea, right? They got nothing else. And so, but it is a really good idea, right? And they come through and they come to ITech and they say, hey, I've got this idea. I think it's really good. I've got investors who are like, I mean, maybe that's good, right? Maybe not. I don't really know. And they get some buy-in from us. They get a little bit of, they get to talk to some of our SMEs. Our SMEs say, hey, actually, the way it's currently constructed, it's a good idea, but it's not a great idea. If you tweaked it like this, then it's really in our wheelhouse. We really like it. And I'm like, oh wow, yeah, okay. Now I'm NASA relevant. Okay, so now I'm NASA relevant. Now that I know I'm NASA relevant, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply to Ignite. And in Ignite, you get let's say you get a phase one. First of all, Ignite tried to do a lot of things to encourage new firms to apply, including lowering the barrier to entry, like 7-page proposals, slide decks. We don't ask for 20-page long form proposals. We're trying to kind of meet those companies, where they are. If you guys are more used to pitching in order to make your case, there's a pitch element to the SBIR Ignite solicitation for folks that make it through the down select process. So we're trying to kind of, allow ourselves to be a little more accessible to those types of folks. And then, so in phase one, you get about $150,000 of funding in order to get to, and then we try to fairly rapidly get folks onto a phase two, and we try to have a higher transition rate from phase one to phase two than in the traditional SBIR solicitation. And we would like you all as companies to be actively seeking follow-on investment throughout that process, hopefully even prior to your phase one application. But certainly if you're awarded a phase one at Ignite, you have to give us that phase two proposal within 4 months of the start of your contract. And so, so you should be actively pursuing an answer to the question, who funds you after SBIR? And so that company can go through, they can get $850K for the phase two. And then after phase two, we actually have several what we call post phase two mechanisms. One of those mechanisms is called a phase 2E, which is an extension of your phase two. It's about $350K of matched funding. So $350 from us, $350 from non-SBIR dollars. But kind of the big home run for getting to the next step. Usually in an SBIR, by the time you get to phase two, you're not going to be at TRL 7, right? You will not have flown the thing and demonstrated it. So it usually takes some more time and money for that. And so we have a program called CCRPP, which is similar to Strat FIs in the military, but it's matched funding at about, the funding varies. It's been as high as 5, but I think now it's about 2.5 million SBIR money matched 1-to-1 with non-SBIR dollars. The goal would be for you to have brought on a private sector investor at the time of your phase two application, essentially to say, if they meet their milestones in phase two, I will match that money in the CCRPP program. And then boom, you get matched funding in your CCRPP. And at that point, you will have raised $6 million. All right. 3.5 of that, I guess, would be from SBIR, would be non-dilutive capital from SBIR. And 2.5 being whatever else you can get. If it's investor money, if it's if it's NASA programmatic money, it's fine. It doesn't have to be dilutive capital at that point. But we think that provides a real value, not only for us as a potential customer or somebody who's responsible for spurring innovation in the market, not just for the company, but also for whatever investor, whatever private sector participant is also going to, share in your success. they're getting a real value add by seeing us de-risk the technical to that extent.
So
But
it sounds like
it has to be done with that end goal in mind at the beginning. So like when we choose topics, when we're picking companies, we can't pick companies that investors won't invest in. We can't pick topics that the commercial sector doesn't care about, right? We have to we have to change the way we do things as well, which is what we're trying to do in Ignite.
it sounds like you're taking a look, not just like a company shouldn't take a look at a phase one. It's just like it's 150,000. They should take a look at it in a 2.5 year span. I'm applying for $6 million, 3.5 of it is non-dilutive. But like it has the whole funding pipeline. You shouldn't take a look at it as the segments of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Ignite is designed with the end goal in mind. And if a company gets a phase one or even a phase two, and then just says, okay, well, thanks for the $1 million. That was fun. It's a failure of the program, right? I mean, now I don't want to say it's a failure of the program, because we are investing in some higher risk stuff and things happen, right? We're not going to hit home runs on everything, but so there is a failure tolerance that's built into it. But if a company is not, I mean, at the end of the very end goal, like our midterm goal is, let's see these investors show us it's a signal for us that we're doing the right things if investors are interested in the companies that are coming out of our pipeline. That's true, but it's not sufficient to get investment, right? Like our goal is not to make venture capitalists rich. That's, our goal is to deliver capability to market in a NASA relevant field. And so just getting to phase two and saying, okay, well, maybe I'll go back and get another SBIR. Like, that's not what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good path for your company. I'm not going to judge you on that, but really what we're looking for is getting that capability to market. And we do think investors are going to have a big role in making that happen, because we can't take that next step with companies. But the end goal for us is capability delivered to NASA relevant markets.
So let's say I'm a deep tech founder. What are mistakes that you've seen in the past, if you can talk about them? Or how should I approach you, or how would you advise me to engage with you or the NASA Ignite program?
Yeah, so the one thing I might want to use as a disclaimer right here is that it's probably the case that there's some people listening that have applied to Ignite. Please know that I am not a reviewer of proposals. I do not know why or how things. I mean, so I designed the program. I do not make the selections. So
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. So
right.
no,
I'm not going to give you the details of any individual thing, but there are some things. So first of all, engaging the iTech program may actually transform, but what will not go away is the community building event. So I would encourage folks to, depending on what phase you're at, and you have to value your own time and figure out what programs are best for you. But the lowest barrier to entry for engaging us is most likely to be that community building event. And so that would be, take advantage of that as kind of like the easy front door for us. I would say that I'm talking a whole lot about Ignite right now, and there are some people I think that believe that all SBIRs need to be commercially focused, like that if it's not the case, then what are we doing? I actually do not have that opinion. I am responsible for Ignite, and Ignite actually does focus on commercial, but the fact is NASA needs all kinds of innovation. Not all of them are commercially viable. If I need tires for the Curiosity rover, there's not a whole lot of Curiosity rovers. There's not a whole lot of places to sell those tires. That doesn't mean I don't need them. And if a small business is super innovative and can supply me with those tires, great. NASA needs that. Okay. So, but the lesson in that is that you need to find out in a realistic way what your fit is. So if you are somebody who's like, I developed these really high-tech things that have really, really niche use cases that are not going to be commercially successful, but are going to be useful to the space program, then you need to figure out which solicitation you belong in. It's probably not Ignite. It's probably another one. And you don't want to waste your time. You don't want to put proposals into things where you don't have a chance. So we really want to, and so I encourage you to use the traditional solicitation if that's the case, right? Like I am a fan of the traditional solicitation. When I was an engineer, I used it all the time. It's a good thing. But I do think that NASA also has other roles to play. And so Ignite satisfies this other role. And so if you do find yourself as somebody who says, yeah, I would love to sell to NASA, but 90% of my sales pipeline is going to be outside of NASA, then those kinds of people, and you have a real plausible way to do it, you can sell us on the fact that we're not going to have to fund you forever. And that your idea is going to be impactful to one of these NASA relevant markets that we're showing interest in, then that would be one of my pieces of advice is, and one of the things that some firms do is they look at a solicitation, they say that's an opportunity for funding, I'm going to go after it, whether or not they're a good fit. And so I think the fit is important. I will say, SBIR can be a numbers game. There's lots of different agencies, lots of different SBIRs, and success rates in SBIR are not super high. So sometimes you have to have a lot of irons in the fire in order to get them. But just because you need a whole lot of irons in the fire does not mean that you should just apply to anything. So you do have to, you have to understand your fit. And then I think the last piece of advice would be the one we already talked about is don't get so wrapped up in your phase 1 or your phase 2 that you forget that there is something that comes at the end of that. You need to be, we are trying to set up a structure where there is transition available, but you all need to be planning for those transitions, and you guys need to be aware of, $150,000 at the end of the day is not going to make or break your company. I mean, it's like your success is going to have is going to require more money and more time than 6 months, 150K. So, you need to be setting up those dominoes so that you can knock them all down when it comes time.
A company can't just be expecting you to fund the entire process and then be a client at the end. They have to do more business development and investment on top.
Right. I mean, that's
parallel.
Especially true in Ignite. So I will say, there are some in the traditional solicitation, the SBIR solicitation for NASA, where it may be plausible for you to say, I developed it through the whole tech pipeline, and now I'm selling it to NASA and only to NASA. That might be possible. And that might be and we'll brag about that too. We have pictures of the Curiosity rover with all this tech that came from the SBIR program. That's great, right? We'll take that as a win from the SBIR program perspective. But for Ignite, if you only sold NASA one widget, then I probably was asking for the wrong topic.
Okay. So throw back to way back when in September, everybody wanted to see the SBIR program. Is it reauthorized? Is it not? How are you looking? It is, by the way, for the people in the audience, don't worry. How are you looking at 2023? Can I ask budget? Can we talk about how many companies you're looking to fund? How's 2023 looking?
We can talk a little bit about 2023. I will say, in regards to reauthorization, it's interesting because we were working on trying to formulate Ignite well before there was all the kind of back and forth on how should SBIR be changed. A lot of that was focused on making it so that companies were more commercializable, but we were Ignite was in process well before that, right? And so Ignite actually doesn't have some of the same threats as some of the other SBIR programs because it was already being responsive to some of those requests in the first place. It was obviously under threat from lack of reauthorization, right? If we can't run, but that we are kind of well aligned to kind of the growing momentum in that direction. In terms of funding, I don't know that I'm allowed to say exact budget information, but what I can say is that Ignite was a pilot effort. This was the first year we had Ignite. In year 2, it is still a pilot effort, and I would expect the scale of the effort to stay roughly the same as it was in year 1. And beyond that, I would hope that we would reach a point where we would say, okay, this is either a permanent fixture of NASA's SBIR program or it is not. We make a decision. And at that point, I would hope that there would be an increase in the resources that would be given to it. To what extent, I don't know. I do not think that there's ever a point where the entire SBIR budget goes to support commercialization, right? Like I said,
Yeah.
we're still going to need tires for Martian rovers, right? That need is not going away. And
Yeah.
therefore, you should not expect the entire NASA SBIR budget to go towards things that are promoting low Earth orbit economy or something like that. But
Okay.
some percentage of it probably would.
Yeah.
So we're probably looking at about the same scale in year 2 as we were in year 1, roughly, with potential for growth depending on the success of the program.
Okay. Could I ask, and you don't have to answer this, how do you look at success for the program? What do you see as a success for year 2?
Oh, a successful year 2. Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So first of all, I will say
I'm putting you on the spot this entire
yeah, well, I can answer that question there's a lot of internal mechanics. So for example, for one, we got 300 proposals in the door for Ignite, and we only had 12 awards to give out, right? And so so that created challenges. That was more response. It was great to get a response that's that high, but in fairness to the companies that are applying, that makes the award rate lower than I would want it to be. And so we might have to be a little more careful about how we're asking for companies to submit, so that we don't drive them into a solicitation with an award rate that's lower than we would consider to be fair. So I would, so I have the same number of awards, and I want the award rate to go up. So it creates a problem for me, right? But that's like kind of on the mechanics side of what you have to do. What I would say the better stuff to talk about is I think so we had I believe it was 72% of applicants to the Ignite program had never won a NASA SBIR before. That is almost 3 times higher than the rates that we see in traditional SBIR, which was a big win. But it's not just that. 75% of our awardees had never won a NASA SBIR before. So you had a better chance of winning an Ignite SBIR as somebody who had never been in the program than you did if you had already won an award, which is not true I don't want to say, I would be shocked if there's another agency that has, besides possibly NSF, that has that structure. Typically, like typical SBIR solicitations have big incumbency advantages, and Ignite did not have an incumbency advantage. And so I think that though in the near term, before we have data on how many investors are investing in Ignite companies, and before we have data on how many of these folks are going to go on to hire more people and start generating more revenue and increase their valuations and go on to deliver product to market, that can be a long process. Before we have that data, we are going to be looking at data like, are the companies new? Are they new to NASA? Are they new to SBIR? Are they successfully able to raise non-SBIR dollars? Are they engaged in NASA programs that are targeting commercial markets? So like we'll be looking at those kinds of things. So yeah, those will probably continue to be the metrics for success until we can find more data. And I will just also say, like, those that wasn't manufactured. Like, if winning an award previously did not baseline anybody out of consideration of Ignite. If you had a great commercial idea and like you were not baselined out. And so that was just a natural consequence of the applicant pool and changes in the process. I didn't maybe mention perhaps the biggest change in the process was that commercialization, your business model, your business plan is 30% of your score on your proposal, which is not true for the traditional solicitation. So that alone creates a different selection process.
So you mentioned at some point that iTech and Ignite had very much a community focus in mind. How do you envision that looking forward? How do you want to expand outreach with the community? How do you want to build your community?
Yeah, so So the iTech program had previously, I think, done a really good job of bringing in people that approach technical problems from a different way. And so we would typically have maybe a NASA SME, a NASA chief technologist, a private sector deep tech investor, and a founder, an early stage founder at the table, at round tables together, talking. And in a lot of those scenarios, it's not just like kind of like telling the company, thou shalt do this. It's also us listening and saying, well, this is why I don't engage SBIR, right? And us kind of like learning those lessons. It's not just the company interaction. It's the NASA folks hearing how an investor assesses a company is dramatically different from the way that we do. And right, that interaction and the investor getting an idea of what a potential customer thinks about the technology that's coming along the horizon, that all is kind of a it is a community building that makes each one of those interactions or those participants, it's a value add for each person in that, that participates in that event. And so I do like the idea. So iTech, as I said, will probably transition to some other community building event, but it will share that kind of theme of trying of not NASA's full of technologists and SMEs that are very technical and very good at assessing technical. But like getting out of that box and realizing that there's more to success than just having the best technical idea and even the best team to advance the technical. Like that is also just insufficient. There needs to be some other things in order to deliver the product to market. And so getting the right perspectives in the room for all of those folks to have a better understanding of what it takes. That would be my goal for the community building effort.
Awesome.
Yes, this is like exactly everything that we're trying to do, right, for the overall defense innovation community. So that pain point is definitely a very, very familiar one. It's a painful one. We'll call it that way. We have to move into the Q&A, even though the conversation's fantastic. Just so that the people who are on, get their chance. So I've selected some of these questions, and we'll continue talking also through these questions, and I'm sure more things will come up. If you guys want, I'll read through them, and
Sure.
I think most of them are directed towards you, Max, but feel free to chime in, and both of you, just for anything that's relevant. If that makes sense.
I saw a couple that again, we don't mean to like put you in an uncomfortable position, answer what you can answer. A lot of companies ask, like, is there any international play that's going to come up at some points? Yes.
So the short answer is no. The SBIR dollars have to. American taxpayers don't love it when SBIR money goes to fund foreign companies. It's just the SBIR program has mandates to fund U.S. firms. So U.S. firms does mean 51% owned. So there can be foreign ownership of a firm. That's not a disqualifying event. But if you are 51% owned by somebody out of the United States, then that is a deal breaker by law. It would have to change. And I don't want to speak for Congress, but based on the way that the themes that were coming out of the reauthorization, I would bet that it's highly unlikely that one of the themes in the going forward would be SBIR funding of foreign companies. Now, having said that, there have been some organizations that have partnered with friendly foreign governments to do kind of co-funding of foreign investments. That has happened in the past. I believe, I don't know if it was Air Force or Space Force or both that was able to do something like that. But even that is complicated and something I wouldn't anticipate NASA doing in the near future.
Okay, that's fair. Just a question that came up, and we wanted to, if possible, give a straight answer there. Can people ask about like timelines? When are you expect the next cycle to open? Do you wish for 600 applicants now instead of just 300?
I personally do not wish for 600 applicants. The amount, And honestly, I don't think the applicants would either, right? I mean,
That's fair.
it drives the award rate lower than would be. But I would say, so in terms of, so we are trying to do an annual cycle, you know, not to the day or anything, but, you know, so we released the Ignite solicitation in, I want to say it was July, you know, annual cycle. Am I guaranteeing it would be in July? No, but, you know, it's, you know,
That's the hope.
roughly summer of 2023, we would hope to release another cycle.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Was there another part of the question in there? I couldn't, but
a lot of people are asking like specific questions about like my company does this. What should we do as the next step? So I don't think that's
right. I mean, well, so here's what I will say is that when I say that that iTech has been run in coordination with Ignite, I mean, if you go back and look at iTech's topics from the last couple cycles of iTech, and then look at the Ignite topics, we use iTech to try to make sure that we are asking for the right things, that we're getting good responses, like those. That's all. So, you know, the earliest you'll be able to determine the general line of, and I don't want to say, I'm not in any way saying that iTech topics become Ignite topics. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that both of those programs are taking a hard look at what's appropriate for small businesses to contribute to in emerging commercial markets. And so if you want to say, hey, what are those kinds of things? You know, you will probably see some kind of hint at that in iTech or whatever replaces iTech before you'll see the actual Ignite solicitation.
okay.
Or you go back and look at the prior Ignite topics or the prior, you know, like, and try to surmise what our general interests are.
A lot of people are actually asking what is the process of like picking the topics for the program. I don't know if you can go into it. Don't have to. I feel like I pushed hard enough already.
I mean, I'm not going to go through the mechanics of it, but in general, what you're doing is you're trying to make sure that so NASA has some types of, you know, strategic plans and initiatives that say that, you know, we should be stimulating markets in these areas. And then you're essentially trying to take of those things that we are kind of either mandated to do or that we've just determined are to our strategic advantage. Of those things, what are the kinds of things that are appropriate for small businesses to handle and can be successfully advanced with the funding levels that are available in SBIRs. And you're kind of trying to and you're trying to make sure that that they are topics that are going, as I said, we don't want to be the perpetual funders of it. So we want to make sure that we're choosing topics that are also gonna have support from outside of NASA when they're done. So those are some of the considerations that are involved, you know, without saying like, you know, the mechanics of the application process for topics.
Okay. You mentioned that a big portion of the winners is like 3 times higher than the standard of first-time applicants to winners. What are your thoughts on like getting help on these submissions? Obviously, you're trying to make it as palatable for startups and first-time submitters. How do you look at that? Because we've heard of proposals getting disqualified from like not being on the right fonts or not having the right margins. So
yeah, so so there are lots of things. There are stories like that. I mean, so navigating. I mean, so we tried to make Ignite as easy as we possibly could, and the fact of the matter is that you know, there are a lot of things that we are required to do when you're spending taxpayer dollars and giving them to a small business. There's a lot of things that safeguards that are put in place that you just can't get around. So we are going to make it as easy as we can, and sometimes it's still not going to be easy. And I'm sorry, but that is the way it goes. And it can help to have people hold your hand through that process. I mean, even me, as I used to kind of be the portfolio designer for ARMD and even for Ignite, it wasn't until fairly recently that I realized exactly how many hoops a small business had to jump through in order to be, you know, getting just getting SBA certifications and stuff like that, and how long the lead times were on that, and all those things. So it definitely helps to have somebody familiar with the process, be able to guide you through that process. As for fonts and margins, that's always a very common thing that people bring up, is like, oh, my font was wrong and they kicked me out. I will say, I mean, there's a reason for that, right? And it's because if somebody, so there have been people that, they're like, oh, it's a 7-page proposal. All right, I'll put 4-point font, and I'll put my 35-page proposal into my, and now I have to read it because I didn't tell you had to use a certain font. Right? Now I have to get a magnifying glass out, and it's not fair either to the other people who had to fit the same amount of, who were trying to who fit a reasonable amount of information into that package, right? And so there are a lot of those restrictions seem silly or stupid or crazy, but they all exist because somebody did something bizarre to try to game the system. So, but yeah, there are people in, like, the SBA has the FAST program that can help people out. There are various people that like yourselves that can help folks out, and I do think that it is, generally speaking, helpful if you're unfamiliar with the process, to have somebody that can guide you through, because it's not always intuitive. And sometimes people, when they don't realize that, like, so for example, with Ignite this year, we typically you have to have a UIE or UEI, your identification number, before you submit a proposal. We waived that requirement because the SBA was backed up in giving those numbers to people. So we allowed you to not have it until you were the time of selection.
Wow.
But like, even that, like, if you were trying to submit the day of the proposal was due and you didn't have that number, you might go, I didn't know I needed that number, right? Like, I can't do it. Like, I've written this whole proposal and I've got nowhere to put it because I don't have a number that I didn't know I needed, right? And so that kind of guidance, it's not always intuitive. And so make sure you're talking to folks well in advance. Try to submit the proposals early. That's another thing, because if you're going to get it bounced back, if the deadline is 5 p.m. and you submit it at 4:30 and you find out you're missing something and it takes a week to get it, or even an hour to get it, you might be screwed. So
definitely don't want to be in a position there's a clog in the system and then that's the reason why it didn't pass.
Right.
We're definitely big supporters of submitting early. All right, so a company listened to you, they're super happy and excited. What do you want them to do now? There's hundreds of people that were very attentive, and this had a lot of value. What do you want them to do now?
I mean, so my first thing that I want companies to do is do what's best for you, right? I want companies to succeed, and right. So I say a lot of things like, so, I'm promoting NASA, right? And because that's my thing, right? But NASA's not the biggest SBIR game in town. We're not even probably the biggest space SBIR game in town, right? There's other organizations. So my first advice would be to listen to what I'm saying, but don't think of NASA's SBIR opportunities as being the exclusive SBIR opportunities. Go look for all the places where you can fit, because you don't want your company to fail because you didn't get your idea in front of the right person. So really do a good scouting effort on where you're gonna be going. And so, but if you do find that place, the best place for you is NASA, my goals or what I would hope that you guys would do would be to really try to engage and understand NASA's needs as best you can to make yourself competitive going in, whether that's through iTech or other means, to familiarize yourself with the need, and to line up all your private sector, kind of get your ducks in a row so that you can tell the best story for whatever solicitation you're going in. Right? Like, so if you say, hey, the traditional solicitation is my best way to go, you want to make sure that you've got knowledge of what program is going to fund you after you're done, right? You want to be able to tell us, not only am I going to give you a good phase 2 deliverable, but after phase 2, this is what success is going to look like. And
Yeah.
so for Ignite, that is most likely to be a convincing argument that that some private sector entity is going to be getting you from whatever we get you to, TRL 5 or 6, to something that's a usable product. And so yeah, getting that stuff prepped, getting your story straight, and just being really well prepared to make your case.
Awesome. We're definitely going to send people to the NASA Ignite program. Where else do you want them to like get information? We obviously we're going to do webinars and posts about it, but any other place you want people to get information about your program?
So there's always SBIR.nasa.gov. There's SBIR.gov. Both of those. I wish those websites were more intuitive than they are sometimes, but that is where we go right now. I believe that the iTech website is still up, I believe, but even if it's not, the upcoming programming for the community building efforts, those, because they're marketed specifically to firms that are completely outside of the NASA, the SBIR umbrella, they're kind of intentionally designed for a more intuitive kind of feel. So I once those become live, those will probably be a good source of information. Also, you know, there are things like keeping an eye on what NASA is doing in other programs, like flight opportunities or commercial ISS, LEO commercialization, tipping point and ACOs that are focused on lunar economy, lunar infrastructure, a LEO economy and LEO infrastructure. Knowing what NASA's kind of getting a feel for NASA's direction and what they think future space architectures are going to look like is going to be important for you to kind of frame not only the like my widget improves on state of the art in this way, but also how does that improvement benefit this bigger system.
Awesome. I don't think I have any more questions. I've done enough damage for the last hour. Max, thank you so much. Any final words before we finish?
I really, I mean, I guess I just want to say thank you for having the opportunity to speak. You know, I know that, you know, what we did with Ignite came out of a lot of effort. We did our RFIs. We tried to talk to small businesses. We tried to figure out how to attack the pain points as much as we could. And I really did appreciate the response that we got from the community. It really showed us that there was kind of a pent up demand for that. And so I just, you know, if I have talked to you folks before, you know, thank you for the input that you guys have given to our program, because we needed to figure out how to, you know, we know that we need to evolve. And so we can't evolve without like kind of an ongoing dialogue. So, so thank you to, you know, I know that private sector investors sometimes don't want to even invest in SBIR companies because they think that SBIR companies are going to make them too niche and they're going to spend too much time. And opportunities like this to try to really explain to folks that we really are trying to do something that is synergistic with the private sector. We're not trying to take companies and deviate them, that we're trying to, their success is our success. Being able to spread that message is really important to us. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for spending the time.
It was a pleasure, really. And folks in the audience, if you want to get a little more understanding, definitely go to the NASA Ignite program. A ton of information there. We're here if you want to hear about more deadlines and agencies and get more understanding about the process. Hopefully we'll be able to help you and get some wins. I think that's a wrap. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both for taking the time. It was fantastic.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
if anybody wants to book a call, my email and the calendar link are available for the next like 60 seconds before it's gone forever. But feel free to book a call. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And you have, in case you want to, there might be some questions that are general SBIR related or, you know, grant related that are very, very general. You could take a look, and if you want, you can answer them, or we can just
let's see. Yes, I do have 2 minutes before I have to go. Doug Hill said, great content. Thank you, Doug. We put a lot of
Thank you.
effort in there. Thank you, everyone. Great program. Yes, we agree. Max Briggs contact info. I don't think you'd want me to share that. How important is it to have a level of support or sponsorship from an agency? Daryl asked that. So Daryl, he talked about it earlier in the conversation. Basically, for NASA Ignite and for iTech, they're saying a lot of the winners weren't first time. Like a lot of the winners were first time companies who submitted. So definitely wasn't mandatory there. Thank you for this granular presentation on NASA Ignite program. What if a company is already building with private funding? Would still be eligible to apply? Yes, as long as you are Paige, as long as you're eligible under the SBIR program. So less than 500 people, majority ownership by US stakeholders, and the R&D is done in the US. Formatting requirements. I didn't want to get too much into it, Anonymous, because I felt that it's stuff that we can help and talk to you about that, but also B, that wasn't the best value that we can get out of him. Formatting requirements, we talked a little bit, we can talk about it later. When will NASA open the next SBIR fund for phase 1 and phase 2? Xiao Chen. The discussions are that submissions to phase 2 winners for NASA is going to be around the middle of January from what I saw on the website. I saw something like January 13th. Don't quote me on the exact date, but these are the numbers that I saw. NASA SBIR phase 1, I'm realistically, usually they open in November. I'm expecting them to open anywhere in that January timeframe as well. Will NASA SBIR have an open topics or pre-selected topics? So NASA Ignite is trying to be kind of a little bit of that SBIR open topic, or at least much more open than the usual stuff. Current Ignite solicitation was due September 1st. Is it too late to submit, or do we wait until next year? Anonymous, yes, it is very late to submit. That's not going to happen. What does dilutive funding mean where NASA Ignite, please? With NASA Ignite. Paul, basically what he said is that after you finish a phase 2 with NASA Ignite, what happens is if you want to take it to the next step of commercialization, you have to find match funding. So NASA is going to give $1 for every dollar you bring from the private sector, on up to $3.5 million. We're not sure on the numbers yet. So that's what it means. NASA gives the money. They don't take equity. The private sector takes the equity. And I think that's all the time I have, folks. I have to hop off. Thank you so much, Yuval. This was awesome. Hopefully Max didn't feel that we asked him too many questions. This was great.
It was
folks.
fantastic.
Thank you. Folks, people are here in the audience. If you want to talk, yoav@eaglepointfunding.com, or reach out to the Calendly link that's in the chat, or hit me up on LinkedIn. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.